all for joining us today to learn about scouting for soybean diseases in the southern U.S. I'm Heather Kelly, professor with the Entomology and Plant Pathology Department at University of Tennessee. So before we get started, I do want to highlight some additional resources you might be interested in on the Crop Protection Network site. There are other webinar videos, specifically Intro to Scouting for Diseases, a general video to talk about what equipment and tools and just general things for scouting you might be interested in, as well as scouting for soybean diseases, which that one focuses on the Midwest region. And then also within the Crop Protection Network, there are scouting tools such as disease fact sheets on specific diseases, severity estimation tools, and disease loss estimation tools. And so with this though, there are some general points I want to make about keys for successful scouting, or even diagnostics, if you will. Keeping good records are very much key. That's your field history, what is the cropping rotation, any previous issues, etc., because that can help you identify what you might need to be scouting for in future seasons and help you identify the issues you might be seeing. Similarly, planting density and date and variety, all very important to record, as well as any applications that have gone in the field, including fertility, the products, the rates, the date, the equipment. The picture I have off to the right here, you see yellowing between the veins almost across the entire field. Well, that's an indication right there that you might not be dealing with a disease, but you need to go back to the spray records, and that was an image taken that was injury from a chemical burn. The picture just to the left of that, a little bit closer up, you want to look at the entire plant because the newest growth is not going to have that injury if it is something that went out in the tank. And so in general, to tell the difference between a disease and a chemical injury, you want to look at that newest growth on the plant. And if that newest growth is not showing the same symptoms, then you need to go back to your records and see maybe what went out over that field. And then again, you need to know and record the growth stage when you are going out and scouting, date and what the growth stage of the plant is. And we'll circle back around to that in some coming slides. And then lastly, take pictures. This helps note the patterns of the symptoms you're seeing in the field. Take at least 3, one close-up of what you're seeing you think is the issue, a whole plant or a row, and then the entire field area. Again, as I've kind of indicated to the pictures on the right of this slide, those help really identify, again, is the newest growth showing those symptoms? If there's something else going on the stem, you even want to dig up plants and look at the roots. All of those things are going to be helpful in identifying and scouting what may or may not be an issue in your field. And so I like to go over just general plant pathology 101, and that is, when is disease going to be an epidemic, or specifically, say for field crops, when is disease going to result in yield loss? That's when is disease going to be a pest. And you can use the acronym PEST to remember the 4 main factors that have to occur to result in yield loss, and essentially where action will need to be taken, if not the current season, then to prepare for the next season to avoid an additional yield loss. So P is for pathogen, pest. You need to know, identify the pathogen of the disease you're looking at. So that's what this talk mainly focuses on, is how to identify those different diseases. That pathogen is going to be influenced by your field history, again, cropping rotation, your location, if you're using cover crops, etc. Next, you have to have the right environment to promote infection as well as disease development. While we can't control the environment, we can control our planting date and our density, fertility, those things that can influence the environment for disease development. Again, why to keep the records on that so we can make sure we're dealing with a disease and not an abiotic issue. S is for susceptible hosts. Know your variety. A lot of the disease management strategies out there is variety resistance. So already knowing where your variety may have weaknesses for certain diseases, you will know what to start looking for when you scout, as well as hopefully maybe rule out other diseases that it should have good tolerances or resistance to. And then lastly is time. You have to have the previous three factors occur at the critical time of growth stage to actually affect yield. You might have the disease develop, the right environment, and susceptible variety, but if it all happens late enough in the season or a late enough growth stage, then your yield will not be effective, and action will not need to be taken. But again, still keeping good notes of what you're seeing and identifying as needed so you can plan accordingly for the next season. So with that, again, know your growth stages for soybean. With the vegetative growth stages, where you're counting the number of nodes to say what V stage you're at, and then getting into reproductive growth stages. R1 is when you see the very first bloom, versus R2 is full bloom, and then R3 through R7 deals with pod and seed development, and then R8 being full mature. And so again, there's another webinar on Crop Protection Network that goes into much more detail about soybean growth stages if you're interested in that. For this talk, I'm going to focus on mainly talking about diseases being either early season diseases, mid-season diseases, or mid to late season diseases. They're highlighted on the bottom of the screen here. There's overlap in this depending on where you are. You might see a disease earlier or later. And in general, the earlier you see a disease develop to, usually that does give it more potential to affect your yield. So keep that in mind. There are a lot of different diseases that can affect soybeans, from the roots all the way up to the top of the plant. And so again, I'm going to cover some of the most common ones for the southern United States in this talk. But again, keep in mind, you want to examine the entire plant. A lot of times symptoms we might see above ground are actually due to below ground pathogens. And so keeping that in mind and setting up my slides going forward, at the top of each slide, I'm going to mention kind of the time period you might see these diseases. So for seedling diseases, it's an early season. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, I have a picture of that soybean plant, and circled will be the area, essentially where you'll be focusing on when you're scouting for this disease or diseases. In the center, I'll describe the actual pathogen that causes the disease, some of the symptoms, how it may overwinter or environmental conditions that promote it. And I'll also try to talk about some management strategies. And then over to the far right will then be pictures of the disease I'm talking about. So seedling diseases, obviously it's a complex of multiple pathogens, from fungal pathogens to oomycetes that overwinter in the debris of previous crops and or the soil. That affect seedlings as they start to grow. And so the main symptoms you see with them that are pictured there on the right, they're called pre or post emergence dampening off or dying. So if plants don't upright and die before they germinate, feed rot, they can die before they actually get out. They'll germinate, but they'll die before they push through that soil, or they can die after they push through the soil. Also, sometimes the plant might not die outright, but it will have a loss of vigor and or be stunted. And so these are things, again, that will be happening early on in the season. Good seed treatments, good soil moisture, again, planting into the right environment is the way to hopefully try to avoid seedling disease issues. And so I jump into Phytophthora here because even though Phytophthora soju is listed on the previous page as a seedling disease, it can also be early to mid-season disease. And so again, pictured on the top is kind of the degradation of the roots in the soil that the pathogen can cause. But then later on, through vegetative and reproductive growth stages, you can see a lesion, usually purple to dark brown, develop on the stem. And essentially those plants usually present a shepherd's foot, kind of bending over, wilting, and intellectual depth. And so with this, and taking note of it, we won't be anything to do for these plants, but taking note of it to know, make sure to look at variety selection going into the future for that field. And variety selection, there are varieties out there that have good resistance tolerance through Phytophthora. And so then again, changing gears a little bit to an early to late season disease, And then another one that was listed for seedling disease pathogen, but it can also cause a later seedling disease called aerial web blight. And so this is where later, usually during vegetative to reproductive growth stages, you see dead somatic leaves in the upper middle canopy. We'll put it over on your right. And so this is most common in soybean rice rotations. This pathogen is a soil-borne and or debris-borne pathogen. Again, with that rice rotation in there, in most promoting evidence, it is also a pathogen in the rice system. So again, where as a seedling disease, we're looking more in the soil and in seedling stages. Here, it's more above ground symptoms that will indicate that you do have aerial web blight. Focusing now in the lower canopy, early to late season disease. Again, this one you can see sometimes the earliest in the season, but it will progress. It might not progress that much, but it will stay and stick around the entire season with Septoria brown spot caused by Septoria glycines. And early on, it can look very similar to herbicide injury on those first true leaves that come out of the bottom of the canopy. So pre-emerged herbicide might splash up off from the soil and cause a similar pattern of lesions. So irregular dark brown lesions that vary in size, usually from the new specks initially, that then coalesce to form larger lesions, as pictured in the bottom right. And again, yellowing can also occur on the leaves that then those leaves may drop prematurely. Again, so you might see this disease early on, but again, rule out that it's not herbicide injury. A lot of times this stays in the lower canopy, but depending on the variety, some have more susceptibility than others and might move up out of that lower canopy and causing the foliage. So again, now an early to mid-season disease, depending on where you are, is downy mildew. So this is one that the newest leaves are usually most susceptible to. It's a cooler level temperature pathogen. So usually you see it early in the season, and then as it warms up, it will no longer be able to continue to grow and develop. Depending on the season and where you are, it might go a little bit more into reproductive growth stages and not just be an early season. So in the upper right-hand corner, you see pale green to yellow lesions on the upper side of the leaf. Again, the newest growth being most susceptible. We flip those leaves over. On the underside, you can see the grayish to white tufts growing, fluffy growths underside, and the fungus growing on the underside of the leaf. You can wipe those off with the clean. Not to be mistaken with saying maybe this chemical residue left on the leaf. So the one individual leaf that pictured just to the right of the mildew are older lesions, and that can turn grayish brown to dark brown. I put that one in because that looks very similar without looking at it with a hand lens. You might mistake that for Septoria brown spot or soybean rust. And so again, one of the tools you want to have with you, somewhere around 10x and greater hand lens to really look at those lesions as well as take in where you find in the clinical. Then we really going to be more in the opportunistic. Compared to Septoria brown spot, we talked about would be in the lower canopy. And then next we'll be talking about soybean rust, which is also in the lower canopy. We're going to, depending on where you are at, you may or may not need to be concerned with soybean rust. Definitely the states that border the Gulf of Mexico, year in, year out, usually have to deal with soybean rust caused by Pathologist. But as you get into more of the northern, mid-south states, Tennessee, Kentucky, other northern Arkansas, Missouri, over in the Carolinas, it's very much dependent upon the year we're having, the storms we're having, because the spores have to be brought up from the south every year to the south of the crop. So again, it's going to begin in the lower canopy, and these lesions on the underside of the leaf are going to be raised, pimple-like or little volcano structures that develop in a circular to angular lesions. And again, this can confuse with multiple diseases as pictured here. And then it starts in that lower canopy and start to defoliate that lower canopy and move up, but rarely does it really get all the way up into the upper canopy, unless it's gone completely unchecked, for a very long portion of the season. But again, this is where again that hand lens comes in handy to identify and clearly see those raised volcano-like structures on the bottom of the leaf that indicate this is soybean rust. Another lower canopy disease is carpet spot. And this one, again, is like yellowing in the lower canopy, but it has the largest of all the lesions that will develop in the lower canopy. Brown, circular to irregular lesions, sometimes with and sometimes without a yellow filler. And again, the size varies as early on there can be very small specks, but rise to being quite large lesions, as pictured here in the other right-hand corner. And again, you're focusing on that lower canopy. And be mindful too, there's a lot of times we're going to be scouting and you need to have a mixture of multiple diseases out there. A lot of times when I do see carpet spot, I will also see portfolio brown spot mixed in with it. Frog-eye leaf spot is another very common foliar disease in soybean. Again, but dependent upon the variety selection. There are many varieties out there that have resistance to this or tolerance to it, where you might not end up seeing it. The picture in the bottom right is actually showing two different varieties next to each other. The one on the right being highly susceptible, where you can see the lesions with halos around them, versus the variety on the left in the same picture, much less lesions, not showing halo. So the main thing to identify frog-eye leaf spot is those lesions are always have a darker border to them, dark brown to purple border. When you're looking at the underside of that lesion, the underside of the leaf, that center will be from the gray to dark brown. That's actually the fungus is sporulating. And so not to be confused again with some chemical injury or drift. And so then over on the right-hand side of the screen now, again, two lesions lined up on the left, the upper picture being the upper side of the leaf, the lower picture being the underside of the leaf. And on the right, you actually see the frog-eye leaf spot. So again, it's more grayed out, and especially when you look on the underside of that leaf, you can see the center of the lesion where it's foliated. Versus when it's chemical injury, it's maybe more bleached out. You usually will not have growth in it unless it's just random saprophytic, maybe black dots that are just secondary fungal saprophytes that have come in and started to colonize that dead tissue. Frog-eye leaf spot can affect kind of anywhere in the canopy. Again, sometimes it might be more visible on the leaf growth, but essentially it will be throughout the canopy. So being again mid to late season diseases, we have Sarcopscura leaf blight. And again, this is one depending on where you are in the South, how big of an importance this might play each season in the soybean. It is a disease that you're going to notice first in the upper canopy. And here you've got bronzing and purpling to blighting symptomology in the upper canopy. This pathogen, it's actually multiple Sarcopscura species have been identified as causative. And essentially, the pathogen is light sensitive and it produces toxin, and essentially when exposed to the light, and hence why you see it in the upper canopy. The picture on the bottom right is showing again two varieties side by side, where the variety on the right is susceptible to Sarcopscura leaf blight, and you see that bronze and purple in that variety compared to the variety on the left. This same pathogen can cause purple seed stain, and you picture at the very top and the seed there. But just because you see the foliar symptoms doesn't necessarily mean you will have it on the seed, as well as vice versa. You might have it on the seed and without seeing the symptoms on the leaf. Southern lump is another pathogen that, again, depending on where you are, you might be seeing this more common than other places. Usually it's noted because you find some dead plants clumped together. And then looking closer at the base of those dead plants and possibly some of the surrounding plants, you'll find white fan-like fungal nets like on that stem and the debris around it. And then on those nets, you can find what are spherical, essentially fungal bodies that can be white, tan, or brown. And so pictured on the bottom and the right on those stems there. And again, so it usually causes a very sudden death. And usually it's only to a few groups of plants. But again, depending on the field history and the variety you're using, there is a possibility it could spread to larger areas of the field. So again, you might notice this foliage simply first of the entire plant declining, wilting, and dying, but it's at that stem near the base and the soil line you need to look at to see if you're going to see some of these signs of the actual pathogen. And so another soil-borne pathogen that shows symptoms later in the season, usually during reproductive growth. So Jason mentioned the mid to late season diseases are usually not noticing until reproductive growth stages. That's not to say they can infect earlier than that, but for the most part, you usually don't start seeing them until reproductive growth stages. And then when that thing is shifting the energy to reproduction, it moves itself a little more vulnerable to pathogens and developing diseases. And so this is another soil-borne pathogen. It's not root decline. It's a brand new species that's recently been defined in the U.S. that was first note when walking the fields with yellowing of leaves. Where the veins can still stay green. But then if you those pictures on the right, when you pull that canopy back, you'll notice next to those plants that aren't dead but showing those yellowing of leaves, you'll find other plants that have completely died prematurely. And again, and first you have again on the previous debris, whether it be soybean, corn, or cotton, you may find what's called stroma on the previous debris with these three dead man's fingers. So that picture on the bottom here, that projection growing out of the previous crop debris, usually covered with white spores. And then lastly, when you go to pull out those plants that are not dead, but showing that yellowing, the taproot is not going to come out of the ground. And that's where it gets its name, taproot decline. Fungus in the soil has rotted away that taproot. And so those are some of the identifying characteristics about taproot, and we do, again, depending on where you are, and there's variety selections available that are more tolerant and resistant to those pathogens. Stem canker is another one we deal with depending on the weather of the year. Sometimes a drier season, you'll see more stem canker than others. And again, as the name suggests, you're looking for a canker on the stem. So the far right picture, usually it's only going to be on one side of the stem and start smaller, like at the bottom of my slide. A smaller lesion and then elongates up from the lonely stem. When you split that stem open, the center tip will be brown, but not to be mistaken for a deckly stem bore has gotten into that soybean plant and fed on the tip. It will also be brown. The leaf symptoms you would notice is yellowing between the veins that then can turn brown and methodically die. So the leaf symptomology can be very similar to what we just saw with taproot decline and what we were about to see after the sudden death symptom. So the previous taproot decline, stem canker, sudden death symptom all have very similar foliar symptoms. One thing that may be noticeable with stem canker that we put on the left, where the actual yellowing kind of occurs on one half of that leaf at first before spreading across the entire leaf. And also later in the season, these leaves can die, but they will hold on, they will stay on to the plant and not fall off. And that's different than what we're going to go through with segment syndrome. So here, the leaves will die and stay on the plant. Variety selection is very much your best option for stem canker. Sudden death syndrome, well, is much more predominant disease in the northern soybean regions. There are occasions we do see it in the south. It is more predominant where you're planting soybean after corn, pushing an earlier planting date under irrigation, and that in general is a high yield potential field and production. And so again, very similar symptoms on the foliage. Again, yellowing between the veins that can turn brown into product. But here the leaves when they defoliate and fall off, just leaving the petioles sticking out of the stem. And again, when you split that stem for SDS, and the syndrome, that center tip will stay white. But the actual vascular tissue around that center tip will be discolored. It's pictured in the bottom right picture of that stem from that slice. But again, the center tip will be white compared to stem painter, where that center tip will be brown under the lesion. So again, sudden death syndrome, we didn't see those lesions on the stem necessarily, unless we've got something else going on with it. When you go to pull out plants with SDS, a lot of times those roots will also be rotten. And so it will be a little bit easier to pull those plants out. But again, the foliar symptoms here are very similar: sudden death syndrome, stem cancer, copper decline, as well as chemical injury, including signs of some fungicides and surfactants. So again, make sure you're looking at that newest growth that is coming out of the plant. If you're still seeing symptoms on that newest growth, then it's like a dealing with a disease. If the newest growth is clean, you need to go back to see what was put out over the period with off-relators. So with sudden death syndrome, I always want to mention soybean cyst nematode after that. This is a soil-borne microscopic nematode that lives in the soil, microscopic worm in the soil. And when paired with sudden death syndrome, also in the soil, it is an added effect, an added hit on your yield. So it's very important to know that you have both of these, but you need to be managing both of them if you're in the framing of one, which they're going to see a lot of yield loss. And so here, you might not see any above ground symptoms from the nematode, depending on how much the density of the nematode is in the soil. But at high enough populations, and susceptible varieties, you may see stunting, still canopy closure, or symptoms that look very much like the potassium deficiency or other nutrient deficiencies, as pictured in white, where the edge of the leaves yellow. And so the bottom right hand of the screen is some soybean roots. You can dig roots out very carefully. You wash in 1 or 2 buckets of water and a little soapy water. You want to be gentle with the roots to clean them off, because as you clean them off, the actual soybean cysts with female bodies can fall off the roots. But in that picture there on the bottom right, on my thumb right there is a tiny white speck. That is the female body of the soybean cyst nematode, as well as then the roots kind of just to the right of my thumb. I'm showing some of those same small white bodies compared to just outside of my pinky are nodules, nitrogen nodules that you want to see those, but you do not want to see the soybean cysts on the roots. Soil samples can be taken at the end of the season is best when the population is the highest in the fields. And then soil probe taken to really send in a sample and assess the field if you have this pathogen in the field. And there's a lot of times it can go unnoticed because it might not show in the above ground symptoms. Just make sure when you're taking that soil probe, you're not going straight up and down in between the rows. You might want to come 4 to 6 inches off your row, angle that probe at a 45-degree angle. So when you're sampling the soil, you're sampling the soil within the root zone of the previous crop, because that's where the nematodes are going to be. Getting into some of our last diseases now that are more mid to late season, and really sometimes more late season, because you usually see some of these symptoms so later. This one, charcoal rot. This is one of the few pathogens and diseases that is hot, dry, loving. It is usually seen most often in drought years, but that's not to say that's always the case. The pictures here on the right were taken during a non-drought year in Tennessee, under irrigation, in some of our delta land. And two different varieties were planted in the same field, yielding very differently. And these strips were left out there, and when I went out there and cut those stems open, you can see the soil line into the roots. That variety on the left is covered up in the vascular tissue with chocolate rock. So it produces small black numerous what we call microsclerotia in your vascular tissue. So it looks like someone's crushed up charcoal and sprinkled it into that stem. That's the charcoal rot meaning. If you see symptoms during the season, that may include loss of vigor, yellowing, wilting, and dying of leaves. But again, these leaves actually remain attached to the plant, and then similar to say stem canker, but different than Southern X syndrome. And our last disease I'm going to talk about for the Southern U.S. are stem and pod diseases, which include anthracnose, as well as pod and stem blight. These look very, very similar. Again, you're wanting to look at the stem, but also on the pods of the leaves. The picture, far right, upper hand corner, it's anthracnose. Those small black bodies, circular, will be randomly scattered on the stems and or the pods versus pod and stem blight. So the picture in the bottom right hand corner, the stem on the bottom of that picture, those black bodies are kind of lining up in columns. They're much more arranged in a row versus that stem right above it where it's still all scattered. That's anthracnose. So they look very, very similar, mainly just the way they arrange themselves on the plant, but you can tell them apart. So in review, again, factors that are needed to result in yield loss due to a disease being a pest. You have to have the pathogen present. So again, we keep good record of what's going on in the field and use these resources as others to help you identify that pathogen or disease in your field. Have a right environment, make sure you're following the changing goals and density and fertility recommendations to promote the least environment for disease development. Acceptable host milieu variety, when possible, select a variety with disease resistance. And then lastly, time. Again, make sure you're noting what time of the season is, what growth stage your field is at. When you're scouting, you know that you do need to take action if you are not saying that they or fungicide to protect from some of these things. And again, just some more information. At utcrops.com, there is a mobile-friendly field guide for insect and diseases in all field crops. The Soybean Derivative Coalition is a great location also to learn more about soybean nematode in soybean, and again, crop protection network resources, and additional webinars, disease fact sheets, severity estimation tools, and disease loss estimates. I'm glad you joined us to learn more about scouting for diseases in the Southern U.S. today. And again, my name is Heather Kelly. Happy to always help field additional questions by email, phone. You might follow me on Twitter, as well as always make sure you're reaching out to your local extension office and understand what resources and help that they can provide you.